Hello, college football fans, and welcome to episode 36 of College Football Throwdown. I am your co-host, Alex Schmitz, and today I'm joined by my dad, Peter Schmitz.
Good evening.
All right. Well, we're finally here, Dad. The end of the college football season. Sad times.
It is very sad times.
I think I looked it up after the game. I think there's like 230 days until the next big game.
That's right. I
game.
think so.
Something
Well,
like
now
that.
the countdown begins again.
Yeah, that's right. Well, we say that, but there will be plenty for us to talk about on the podcast with recruiting and the spring game. So
yes.
There's stuff to look forward to.
Oh, and actually there's so many ththings that we need to talk about, things that we haven't talked about in the week-to-week of the season that have to do more with, the game or the sport of football, right? And what's happening that way. So I'm excited about some of the subjects that we can talk about. And in fact, this might be as good a time as any to toss that out there for any of our listeners or folks who listen to the podcast this time, that we're a podcast that loves to talk about subjects like that. And so if somebody has a question or an issue that they think should be addressed, we would love to hear from them.
That's right. And for those of you who are listening to our podcast for the first time, just so you know, this is College Football Throwdown, a college football podcast by college football fans for college football fans. And we're this father-son duo. We've been doing this for a little while now. We have 36 episodes, not too shabby. And this particular episode is going to be talking primarily about the national championship game, the Alabama-Clemson game, as well as a few pieces of news that have come out since then. I was just reminded, actually, we did get a comment on one of our previous podcasts on episode 34, which was the Nebraska-UCLA recap episode. Steve commented on our website, footballthrowdown.podomatic.com, and said, "I'm not saying that you have to blast right up the middle, but when we're inside the 5-yard line, I expect to run the ball into the end zone. I know you know what I'm talking about. I believe the official term for it is getting cute."
That's funny. That's true. That's also very true.
Yep. So, yes, we agree with you, Steve. More, in those situations, you got to run it. Honestly, even in talking about this Alabama-Clemson game, I feel like there were some situations with Clemson where I thought they had been having some success running the ball, and then get to 3rd and short, and they'd throw it, and it would sometimes bamboozle me a little bit.
Right.
Yeah. But before we dive into that, we're going to do, as is our tradition, and crack a cold beverage.
All right, let's do that.
My turn this time, so.
All right. Yep.
All right.
Now, the most important question to ask before we get into the national championship discussion is, do you have tickets for Powerball?
I do not. Do you?
I do.
You do. You're
that was my errand.
Part of the fan.
I got in three minutes underneath the wire.
Wow. So you went out last minute just for that, huh?
Yes, I did. I don't do that very often either, as you know.
I don't know. Listeners don't know about this, but there's stories about you going away from school board meetings to take your son out gambling at the casino. So you do have some inclinations. All right. So for this game, actually, it started at 5:30 my time, Pacific time. So basically, right after I got out of work, I went to a bar in Toluca Lake, right near my workplace, and it was actually pretty cool. It's this like Irish pub, just a locally owned, small place, but there were a lot of it seemed like there were a lot of Clemson fans in there because they were definitely cheering for Clemson, and it was a nice environment to watch the bar in, some commonly interested people around and some good food, so it was good times. How about you?
That's cool. We watched it right here at the house with a couple of friends and enjoyed just kind of cheering the good game on. It was so nice after what I think we both jointly described as a kind of disappointing bowl season in terms of just not having very many entertaining games. As good as all the matchups looked, there were quite a few games that were lopsided and didn't produce the kind of interest that you would have hoped. And so to have a national championship game that kind of kept you captivated was a good thing.
That's true. Actually saw a list on ESPN where they were talking about the like top 10 national championship games, in terms of history, and they ranked this one up at like number 5, I think. Like a lot of people are talking about it as being one of those classics.
Yes, I think it certainly was a classic game in that neither team gave up. There was they were always in it. You could just kind of feel that both teams were on the edge. They would take momentum at a certain point, but no one ran away and hid. It was very much a game that was in the balance.
Yeah. I think they did a good job of proving that these were the top 2 teams in the country, playing for their lives here at the end. Going into our predictions, I come out on top on this one. You had predicted an Alabama victory of 31-14 over Clemson, whereas I predicted an Alabama victory 38-31. So neither of us were right in terms of the score,
But you were pretty close.
But I was all right. I did all right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Absolutely.
I guess you didn't think Clemson was going to put up much of a fight from the
I did,
score.
well, not so much that I didn't think they were going to put up a fight, but that I felt that after watching Alabama in the first round of the playoffs, I believed I was fairly confident that over the course of the game, Alabama would at some point secure control and then just kind of start pounding them. And Alabama wasn't ever able to do that. In fact, they ended with only like 135 yards rushing or something like that. And really, from a line of scrimmage standpoint, I would have to admit that Clemson was at least equal, if not a little better than Alabama at the lines of scrimmage. I mean, certainly Clemson's defensive line wreaked havoc on Alabama's offensive line.
Oh yeah. Well, I think they were making the point that this was like the worst performance for Alabama's defense all year. Like nobody put 500 yards on them, even close to that.
Right.
And this definitely went to show that Deshaun Watson is probably the best quarterback in college football at this moment, because he was on fire that night, and that was pretty special to watch.
It was amazing.
Yeah. So talking about, because I remember it was surprising, because Alabama, got that big score by Henry early on, and so that kind of had me a little bit worried. But then, Clemson went up 14-7 and had the chance to, start another drive and go up by 14 points, which I think would have seriously changed the complexion of the game. But that's where Watson threw his only interception of the night, and they took that one back, and scored, tying it up. And I think that was definitely one of the turning points in the game.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I mean, that's the deal, especially with a team like Alabama. You need to kind of put your foot on it when if you get the opportunity to get them down, you need to put your foot on it and make sure that you don't give them that life to come back in it, because they'll find a way. Now the reality is that every time Alabama seemed to have one of those big plays, whether it was one of their and their special teams obviously were the difference in the game with the things that they did, but Clemson never gave up. I mean, there were so many points there where you would think that Clemson might just throw up their hands and say, I just, in frustration and kind of diminish their intensity and focus a little bit, but they didn't do it. So a lot of credit to Clemson and their staff and coaches and stuff. And Clemson's a young football team, so I would be shocked if Clemson isn't in the middle of it again next year. Now, there are a couple of other teams in that ACC that might have something to say about that, but Clemson's certainly going to be in that mix.
Oh, yeah. I was surprised, actually, when I realized that, Watson's a sophomore and a lot of their starters are sophomores. Someone was talking about that on the radio.
And they did lose like 4 early entrants to the NFL draft, but still they're going to have an awful lot of returning starters and a really good core of players.
Oh, yeah. Well, and specifically to what you were just talking about, if I recall correctly, there was the other big turning point in the game, where Alabama gets a big play, but then actually has to settle for a field goal, in the red zone to tie up the ball game. And then Nick Saban goes for his risky, crazy onside kick and gets it, catches everyone by surprise, and scores like 2 plays later. So that was definitely like this could be the death nail thing. But Clemson came out and like scored within like less than 2 minutes, I think, right after that. And
Right.
it looked like they were back in it. And then Alabama had the kickoff return, and
Right.
that was where it really kind of.
But yeah, and that's the thing is you can point to all these points within the game where Alabama had something just absolutely spectacular happen in their favor, and then but then Clemson would just climb right back into it.
Yeah. Well, and what's interesting looking at the stats here, this is pretty crazy. First downs, Alabama had 18, Clemson had 31.
Right, I know. I was going to bring that up actually. It's interesting that you figured out that same thing. I agree that and looking through the information on the game stats, that was the one that jumped out to me. But it doesn't completely surprise me as I think back to the game. It was pretty clear. I mean, Clemson was just moving it down the field. That offense was really unstoppable. They only stopped themselves. I mean, it really wasn't necessarily that Alabama was doing a great job of stopping them.
Oh yeah. Well, and that was one of the points I was going to make, was that Clemson had a lot of drives, where they had successive plays that scored, whereas Alabama, it was crazy that Clemson's defense would look like they were completely, the iron wall, completely shutting down everything, not letting Coker get any passes, sacking him a bunch of times. But then they'd have these horrific blown coverages looking like early 2015 Nebraska, and Alabama just got a bunch of big plays, and they were able to score easily because of that.
Part of that is execution and having some plays that obviously they had seen and maybe felt they were going to have some advantage. And then keep in mind that Clemson was playing without one of the best players in the country, and one of their cornerbacks was hurt going into the game. They weren't even sure Alexander, whether he was going to play or not. Mackenzie Alexander is his name, and he ended up starting the game, but then he got hurt fairly early on and was replaced. And so that one of the young defensive backs that was in that backfield was in fact involved in a couple of those huge blown coverage plays. Now, not that he was necessarily the one that was an error. I'm not going to claim to know, but just knowing that there was some transition going on back there because of injuries was a big part of it.
Yeah, Clemson had a few players going off the field throughout that game. They had a few big injuries I could think of.
Yeah, and that's the thing that I kept talking, even texting with you about during the game was, that I tell you what, you just can't allow a team like Alabama that has the talent and physical capabilities that they have. You can't keep allowing them to kind of hang in there and just keep pounding on you and doing that sort of thing, because eventually that wears you down. Now, I'm going to say that I think Clemson was successful enough offensively and kept Alabama's team on the field enough that wear down factor probably never really came into play, but that was the fear that you had throughout the game,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, another turning point I can recall, I believe, was in the fourth quarter where Clemson's defense did a great job. I think got a sack or two, and so they kicked it from like way back in their own end zone, and Clemson got the ball on the 50-yard line, and that was early in the fourth quarter, I believe, when Clemson still had the lead, and so that was kind of the moment where they could stab the knife down, and take a more commanding lead. But they couldn't do it in that situation. They had to punt it, and then the punt went into the end zone, so it really was only like a 30-yard punt, and that was the moment where Clemson had the chance to kind of put the game away a bit, and they couldn't do it.
Right. It's true. That is
Yeah.
true.
Another interesting stat here. Both not great on third downs. Alabama was 9 of 18. Clemson was 6 of 14, which I think goes to show how often they were converting on first and second downs on a lot of those
True.
drives.
That's true. And 9 of 18 isn't terrible. I mean, 50% isn't a horrible number
No.
by any stretch, but it's not bad. But it's not good either. I guess you'd want to be a little higher than 50%.
Yeah.
But
I mean, it just goes to show how often Alabama was getting put into third down
third downs, yeah,
situations.
that's right. Exactly.
You know,
Exactly.
also impressed both teams pretty light on penalties.
Yep.
2 and 4 for just like 20 yards each. Time of possession's pretty much the same, split right down the middle. Yeah.
Yeah. That's the thing. Very clean game. There wasn't a lot of chippiness for the most part. Both teams were out there playing hard for each other. It was exactly what the sport needed after, like I said, a somewhat disappointing overall, bowl season. It was great to have this be the capstone event.
Yeah.
For the sport.
And for as much as Alabama kind of put away there in the fourth quarter, I mean, Clemson scored and they had 12 seconds left and they went for the onside kick. Had they gotten it, they'll have 1 or 2 chances for a Hail Mary, to win the game. So it really was a game that was competitive down to the very end.
Right, absolutely. Well, and that's the thing. I mean, I think it was, I don't know what the exact time was. Maybe it was 7 minutes or something like that left. The game was tied. You can't ask for much more than that if you're wanting to write a script for a good, entertaining football game. And I'm sure once all the television numbers and stuff come out, it'll indicate that it was a good game. Maybe not as great a numbers as last year, but I bet you'll be pretty close. So that whole concern about the semifinals being on New Year's, which turned out to be not great for a numbers rating standpoint, this was quite good.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, and to go back to what we talked about before, I mean, I have to give Saban. I have some issues with him, as we've talked about on this podcast, but give him credit as a coach. That was a brilliantly executed onside kick because from reading the interviews with him afterwards, apparently they had practiced that move in practice. Then they noticed that Clemson's formation, they weren't lining up towards that left side of the field. There was a gap there, and so they saw that and they took advantage of it.
Right. Now, and you may recall, first of all, I want to reiterate what you said, which is that was a brilliant onside kick, and it was not only was it a great idea, it was perfectly executed, just perfectly executed. So
yeah, but just to put it in context, I mean, think about that. That was right after I think Alabama had kicked a field goal to tie the game up. There, what do I want to say? If that hadn't worked, if Clemson had gotten the ball, I mean, Nick Saban basically just gave Clemson an easy score, and people would be calling him an idiot, But because it worked, he's a genius. So that's how it works.
That's right. Exactly. But I'll tell you, what's his name? The coach from Clemson,
Sweeney,
Dabo Sweeney was absolutely going crazy after that, and then after the game, he explained what he was trying to convey. Apparently, they had run a similar type of onside kick situation, and it had been and the onside, even though they had been successful, the onside kick was what I want to say, it was reversed because the explanation they got was you have to give the receiving team an opportunity to catch or to secure the football. That it was deemed illegal because that the team had not given them an opportunity, meaning you couldn't just kick it to yourself, which is effectively what Alabama did in this case. And I want to. That's one thing I want to do is do a little bit more research into the rule book as it relates to onside kicks to understand where that ever came from. And so anyway, I think it was against like Georgia or Florida earlier this year. Clemson was playing somebody, and I think it must have been Georgia because I don't think they played Florida. But bottom line is Clemson kind of got the raw end of the deal on a onside kick earlier in the year, in which a similar situation had occurred.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I guess it was a little unusual in that usually you'll see with an onside kick like that, they try to kick it into the ground and make it, go up, bounce up.
Bounce weird. Right. But I've never heard of this whole you've got to give them a chance to catch it first type of thing. I think as long as it goes 10 yards, it is a live football. It's like a fumble, and you can go get it. So the fact that they were able to pooch kick it like that and just literally catch it on the run like they did, was just amazing, I think it's just a great scheme.
Yeah, no, definitely worked really well. So I guess getting into some overall thoughts here just about the game. I mean, like I said, I enjoyed it a lot. It was real entertaining. It was, tough from my perspective because I wanted Clemson to win. So I kept waiting for them to, put the game away. And then, seeing Clemson or Alabama, score 24 points in the fourth quarter, and come away with the victory, that definitely hurt. And seeing, I don't know much about him, but I already like Dabo Sweeney from the little bit I do, because he seemed super into the game, and to see him hanging his head there at the end was definitely kind of a bummer for me. But a great game all around. Congrats to Alabama for earning it.
Yep, exactly. I mean that's a good summation. I feel the same way, it's disappointing because I have great respect for Nick Saban as a coach and what he does, he has brought a lot of things to the sport, but he's also brought some things that I vehemently disagree with, and we're going to have some future podcasts where we delve a little further into at least our perspectives on why is it that a team like Alabama has been able to develop the dynasty and the consistent level of success that they have. What are the aspects of that, of their decisions and their process that I admire, and what are the aspects and areas that I do not acknowledge or want to pursue, because there's some things that I think that have really damaged the sport long term because of some of the decisions that and programs that he's put in place. But there's other things that he does that are just outstanding, and you can't do anything but admire.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I wanted to actually bring that up. Now that, Nick Saban has led Alabama, I believe it's now 5 championships within 7 years, and he has maybe it's 8 years, and he
has 4.
Right.
He has 4 at Alabama and 1 at LSU.
That's right. So it's four national championships in 6 years. I think that's what it is at Alabama. And now he has 5 total. So the only coach that has more than him now is Bear Bryant.
Right.
So what do you say to that in terms of the whole, the Alabama dynasty and Nick Saban is the greatest coach of all time discussion?
Well, I mean, he certainly is in the discussion. And I would argue that in this day and age, with the scholarship limits the way they are, with the distribution of opportunity and access to both athletes and money that exists in today's college football environment, I would have to say that he has to, he has to be right there as the greatest of all time. I mean, I think the numbers, he has put together a book of numbers that are going to be pretty darn hard to dispute. The only question would be, Bear Bryant, and a few other coaches maybe had this level of consistent success over a longer period of time. And so the longevity thing maybe isn't quite there in Nick's corner yet. But in terms of just pure high-level performance and achieving that pinnacle of national championship, Nick has done it, better than anybody.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd have to agree. In terms, if we're talking about, coaches as leaders of men, I'd have an issue with that because, that Nick Saban has some issues in terms of how he views the student athlete, that we've talked about in the past, we'll probably talk about more in the future. But in purely football terms, I mean, I don't think there's any question that he is one of the greatest.
Yes, I would say that's true. And Dabo Sweeney as a young coach now, and he's one I probably have more admiration for, just because I like some of the things that he is doing as a coach, both in terms of on the field, but also in terms of how he goes about his program development, his process. I think maybe lends itself a little more to the student athlete side of things than Nick, and so that would be an interesting compare and contrast for us down the road.
Mm-hmm. That's right. And you had some news that came out today about some changes from the NCAA Rules Committee, correct?
Right. And the big news coming out today was that the Big 12 had made a request or put in a request for a change in the interpretation and how a conference could get a conference championship game. In the past, it has always been that you needed to have at least 12 teams, and those teams needed to be divided into divisions so that you could basically set up a conference championship game. Now, the need for divisions is eliminated, and the quantity of 12 is no longer required as a minimum standard. Now, the standard is simply that you need to have everybody play each other in a round robin type of schedule structure to be eligible to then have a conference championship game. So a conference like the Big 12, which has only 10 teams, could now have a conference championship game, even though they don't have divisions and they don't have 12 teams.
Yeah. Now here's an interesting thought that this new rule brings up, and I'm not saying that this is going to happen because I don't think it's likely, but if there were to be, some conference redistribution at some point in the future, or a new conference were to, arise or whatever, that was 8 teams, so now they have a conference championship game too, as long as they have a round robin, and fill the rest of their schedule with, non-conference opponents.
Well, without reading all the details of the rule wording, I think my initial interpretation, based on the articles I read, I believe the answer is yes, that they would be eligible to do that. And here's the bigger point is I think what might be interesting if you started to see some conference realignment again is that some conferences that find themselves at 14 might revisit whether that was a good idea or not. And maybe even shrink a little if they could begin to convince themselves that maybe by you'd be able to divide the pie among fewer teams and still get a lot of the same revenue stream from your television partners. There would be at least a temptation to maybe reconsider that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think the idea that of splitting the same amount, or a similar amount between fewer mouths, is a tempting one, and that's why the Big 12 wanted this in the first place, because they didn't want to add 2 more teams, to their conference when there aren't a ton of top tier teams available.
Right. Are you asking a question in that?
No, I'm just saying that's a statement. I think that's why they did it, for exactly what you just said.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And so, yeah, it brings up a lot of, it basically changes a lot of rules regarding, the decisions that led to some of this conference expansion and stuff. I mean, the Big Ten sat there for, from 1994 until whenever the Nebraska got into the Big Ten at 11 teams, and were unable to have a conference championship game for those early years. I mean, the Big 12 had a conference championship game starting in 1996, and the SEC I think started even before that, maybe in '94 or something. So I mean, they toiled for a decade or more without being able to have that conference championship game, and the money that represented, You know what I mean? So that's crazy.
Although I wonder, because like you said that there were some coaches within the Big 12 who talked about with this recent rule that they weren't necessarily a big fan of it because that's a extra kind of hurdle they have to overcome, an extra game, if they want to be the conference champion, be the best in the conference. And I'm sure there was probably some similar talk in the Big Ten, especially given that at that time, it was the BCS system, so it was about the voting and the polls, and whereas because of the college football playoff now, with the increased emphasis on strength of schedule and all that, I think that extra game has become more important, as we saw with the Big 12 last year, in 2014. So I think had we had the college football playoff back in that time when the Big Ten was at 11 teams, I think they probably would have been quicker to jump on somebody to get a 12th, in that situation.
Yes, I would agree. But here's my whole point is that I wish the NCAA would have had a little backbone and said, because of the history and that there has been a whole series of decisions that have been made over the last 2 decades that have led us to today based on this rule, that we can't basically in midstream make that change happen. We just can't do it. And so we're gonna simply hold the line here and encourage you guys in the Big 12 to get serious about how you might find yourself a couple more teams and get to 12, because ultimately I think long term for the sport it would be healthy for them for the Big 12 to do that.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Well, it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. In terms of, I know that it sounded from our conversation before that Jim Delaney of the Big Ten wanted to add some extra limitations or additions to those to this rule change.
Yeah,
so I'm curious about what those ended up being.
Yeah, me too. I don't know if those got waived or what happened there, but and it didn't necessarily have to do with him trying to stop them or make it go to 12. It had to do with some other issues that he saw as potential kind of unintended consequences of it. But anyway, I would have to do more research.
All right. Were there any other major changes from this kind of rules meeting? Or I know that was the biggest one.
That was the one that was getting all the article coverage, and I suspect, like I said, I think that they probably didn't get together and have a meeting just to decide just that one rule. There had to be other rule decisions too. So I'll have to do some more research, and we'll do that on a future podcast. There's a little teaser.
There we go. All right. Do you have anything more you want to talk about, or are you ready to wrap it up here?
I'm ready to wrap this one up, and but just let those who are listeners know that we're going to continue to do podcasts. They may not be as consistently, 2 times a week or even 1 time a week. They may be more based on news and availability, but we will continue to do that. So I really want to invite and encourage folks to, if they haven't done it before and they enjoyed listening to our podcast, that they sign up at Podomatic, because it really is easy to kind of keep track of when a new one comes available, right? By simply having becoming a subscriber to our Football Throwdown podcast.
Yep, that's right. And I want to talk about that. I know on the previous one we had talked about some ideas in terms of kind of a 2015 season recap, maybe both for college football as a whole as well as the Huskers, and some conversations about like the medical scholarships and those kind of bigger issues that we've been going kind of on and off about for a long time now. So I'm hoping that we can settle into some sort of like kind of bi-weekly schedule for the off season, and maybe ramping up when we get closer to the spring games and that sort of thing. Sure.
That sounds like a plan. I like it.
Cool. All right. Well, if you out there enjoyed listening to this, you can email us at huskerpete13@gmail.com. You can find us online at footballthrowdown.podomatic.com or on iTunes under College Football Throwdown. You can comment on the Football Throwdown Podomatic page, or you can subscribe to us on iTunes and leave us ratings, reviews. We always like hearing from you guys, all that good stuff. So thank you out there for listening to us for this 2015 college football season. And thank you, Dad, for joining me for this podcast.
Thank you. Appreciate it, son. And you have yourself a great week, and we'll talk again soon and have another podcast here before we know it.
That's right. Go Big Red.
Go Big Red.